Good morning, Grace Church. My name is Victoria. If we have not met before, I am your ministry coordinator. And if I have not had the honor of meeting you, I would love to meet you after service. Thank you, guys. Let's start this morning with some prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Please help us learn when silence is the best answer and continue to help us tame our tongue. Amen. How many of you have had a moment in your life where you just had to get the last word? Or you had to prove how right you were? Well, it's good to know that I'm still talking to people that are just like me. We all have things that we struggle with, and the Bible tells us many times that taming our tongue is one of the hardest things to do. But not being able to is also deadly. You can ask anyone that is close to me on a regular basis if I like to be right, and I'm pretty sure you will get the same response. Yes. I have struggled with my need to prove my point, even at the expense of somebody else's feelings. It is absolutely not one of my best characteristics. I feel horrible about it afterwards, and I'm really working hard not to do it anymore. The need to be right or to prove that I am right is not what I should be focused on. Being right and proving my point can hurt somebody else, and that is not my intention. It is our job to love others and to show people home to Jesus. When I stay stuck on being right and speaking when I should not, people are not being brought home to the Lord. Being right is not actively being Jesus' hands and feet. Now, of course, I know what I'm supposed to do. My parents raised me right. We had manners that we did not ignore because the back of my head did not need one more swat. I have learned that silence is often golden. I understand God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. People have been telling us for a long time in many different ways to watch what we say. I've heard people say things like, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Abraham Lincoln and Mark Twain. Speak when you are angry, and you will make the best speech you will ever regret. Now let's see if you know this one. If you don't have anything nice to say, I have not only heard this next one, but I have felt the truth and the pain of it. The tongue has no bones, but it is strong enough to break a heart. You see, my problem wasn't that I didn't learn these things. It was that I did not put them into practice. Let's look at the book of Proverbs. This book has a lot to say on the topic. Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity. Proverbs 21 and 23. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18:21. I know these verses, and I'm sure some of you do too. The reality is that doing what they say is not just difficult for us. James, the half-brother of Jesus, wisely described our dilemma with speaking when we should not this way. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It's a relentless evil full of deadly poison. James 3:7-8. I mean, we can do a lot of things as humans. We can take airplanes to different countries. We can video call a person around the globe. We can cure illness, invent new and more effective technology. We can put ourselves in outer space. Humans can invent new things all of the time. But what is the one thing that we struggle with? Despite all of our human advancements, inventions, and knowledge, it's not the only thing, but for me, it's one big thing. The struggle to know when we should speak and when we should be quiet. This is why I stand in awe of Jesus on occasion. Jesus can leave me in stunned silence, even me. It's especially true when I read about Jesus' passion. In the series of messages, we have been following the story of Jesus during the week of his earthly life, the last week of his earthly life. We have traveled with him and his disciples through the accounts of them entering into the city of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago for Passover. At the Holy Meal, Jesus introduced a new kind of deliverance is ready to take place. Instead of rescuing us from slavery like Moses did for the Hebrews, Jesus tells his disciples he's going to be their deliverer from the slavery caused by sin, Satan, and our own selfishness. Jesus introduced what we call the Lord's Supper to remember this rescue and the new covenant. The last 2 weeks, we saw Jesus wash the feet of his disciples and then travel with 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, to the Garden of Gethsemane. In this place where olives are pressed and crushed, Jesus admits to his Father that his soul is overwhelmed to the point of death. The stress is so much that he literally sweats drops of blood. We saw Jesus end his prayer with resolve and covenant and trust in God's will, not his own, as the shadow of the cross loomed larger and larger over that dark night. From there, we see Jesus stop sweating blood. He concludes his prayer, stands, wakes up his sleepy friends, just in time for Judas to arrive and betray him. Jesus is taken to the Jewish officials named Caiaphas' house. As the city begins to buzz with news that Jesus was arrested, Peter would soon deny knowing Jesus. That night, he was brutally mistreated, and many scholars believe that he was tied up in a dungeon under Caiaphas' house. What happens next is a series of trials. In fact, this plays out like an unbelievably bad episode of Law & Order, or whatever your favorite legal movie is. What we see in these trials is that Jesus, our all-perfect Savior, actually masters the art of taming his tongue. Jesus, the one with all of the knowledge, knew how and when to be quiet. Before we dive into these trials, here's our sermon in a sentence. With Jesus, I can live with nothing to lose, nothing to hide, and nothing to prove. Throughout Luke's narrative about Jesus, he pays special attention to the fact that Jesus was innocent of every charge thrown at him. Not even the corrupt and competing judicial systems of the first century, Israel and Rome, can find evidence to support their claims. Even Pilate says over and over again, Jesus is innocent of all crimes. Other witnesses of Jesus' life affirms that he was without sin of any kind. Today, we are going to break down Jesus' appearance in the 4 trials. Let's look at scene 1. At daybreak, all of the elders of the people assembled, including the leading priests and teachers of the religious law. Jesus was led before his high school council, and they said, "Tell us, are you the Messiah?" But he replied, "If I tell you, you won't believe me, and if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated in the place of power at God's right hand." They all shouted, "So are you claiming to be the Son of God?" And he replied, "You say that I am." "Why do we need another witness?" they said. "We ourselves heard him say it." Luke 22, 66 through 71. So first, Jesus is brought before the Sanhedrin. This was a group of people made up of chief priests and teachers of the law. You might think of them as the religious Supreme Court that ruled Judaism and the temple in that day. They held authority, interpreted the law, and made decisions. Their problem was that since they were occupied by Rome, they were forbidden to sentence anyone to death. The best criminal charge that they came up with was to think of something that would get Jesus in trouble with the occupying Rome. And since Caesar was considered the one and only Son of the living God on planet Earth, they want the record to show that Jesus called himself the same thing. There were no criminal charges, and they could make stick, so they decided to go after his identity. "If you are the Christ, the Messiah, tell us." In this moment, they are looking to trap Jesus. They are seeking grounds for condemnation. Jesus chooses not to react the way that they wanted, He does not defend himself. He does not argue. He does not attempt to belittle his accusers. Instead, he says, "From now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." Jesus isn't defending himself with that line. He is just stating what he has already said. His identity is God's beloved Son. Many scholars say in this moment, Jesus is pointing back to Psalms 110. He is talking about the authority being enthroned and who he really is. And then he says, "You say that I am," which echoes back to all the way back to Exodus, when Moses asked God, "Who should I tell them sent me?" And God responds, "I am." The accusers actually become Jesus' witnesses. In this scene, Jesus has nothing to lose. He knows who he is. His identity is secure. Now, I want you to think back to last week. Jesus has already settled the fact that he is facing the cross in that prayer with his Father. Jesus has already chosen to face death. In many ways, Jesus has nothing to lose because he's already dead. Jesus lives for his Father, and he died to his own will, own comfort, and own plans. Jesus remains surrendered and unfazed by the insults. He's not fazed by their actions or words. He does not start sweating blood again. They are threatening to kill Jesus, but Jesus is already a dead man walking. As followers of Jesus, we are invited to live in this freedom. One of the powerful symbols of baptism is that it represents us dying to ourselves and our old life. When I forget this, I can become defensive. One of the reasons that I talk back so much is because sometimes I'm insecure, and that there is more at stake than just winning or losing a debate. Sometimes I'm arguing for my own soul or identity. But Jesus knew what we preach around here all the time. He knew he was God's Son. He knew he was beloved. He is a child of God and person of worth, a cogpal, and so are you when you say yes to Jesus. Now it's time for trial 2. Living with nothing to hide. In the political world of the day, Caesar was Lord, and Pilate was the local ambassador over Jerusalem. Jesus' next appearance is before him. The entire council took Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. They began to state their case. This man has been leading our people astray by telling them not to pay their taxes to the Roman government, and by claiming he is the Messiah, a king. So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said it." Pilate turned to the leading priests and to the crowd and said, "I find nothing wrong with this man." Then they became insistent, "But he is causing riots by his teachings wherever he goes, all over Judea, from Galilee to Jerusalem." "Oh, he is a Galilean?" Pilate asked. When they said that he was, Pilate sent him to Herod, because Galilee was under Herod's jurisdiction, and Herod happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. Luke 23, 1-7. Notice the council and their attorneys kept changing their accusations before Pilate. First, he's accused of opposing taxes, subverting the nation, and trying to claim to be king. Pilate isn't interested in the religious debates of the Sanhedrin. His job is to keep the city of Jerusalem quiet and not let anything look like a rebellion that could take his place. Pilate asks, "Are you the king of Jews?" Jesus again takes time to think about his words and uses Pilate's own words against him. "You say so." Again, we see it. Jesus is calm. Pilate can also see that Jesus is not rattled, and he is not guilty of any crime. So for the first of 3 times, Pilate says, "I find no basis for a charge." We see and know that Jesus has nothing to hide. He has no secret sin. His integrity is without question. Many times when I find myself being argumentative, it is not because the topic was so truly important. It was just because I'm not secure enough in myself to let someone else think I was wrong or to find fault in me. It was out of fear that I would speak, argue, or debate as a form of hiding my true self and even my failures. These days, however, I am finding the power to be quiet. This comes from the confidence that I don't have secrets. I have a few trusted people in my life that I can be totally honest with and am safe with. Many of us carry this hidden fear, and it goes a lot like this. If you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. And that is a lie. Because in Jesus, we no longer have to hide who we are. He knows our true selves, and he loves everything about us. Or he knows everything about us, and he still loves us. Wes has a perfect saying for this. If our secrets make us sick, honesty opens the door to our healing. Jesus has nothing to hide. This helps him stay confidently quiet. More will come, but first, Pilate does what many insecure leaders do. He passes the buck. Pilate looks to unload his problems on a local official who managed the territory of Galilee, Jesus' home. Pilate knew Herod was in town and sends Jesus to him. And that leads us to scene 3. Jesus before Herod, living with nothing to prove. Herod was known as the Tetrarch of Galilee. Since Pilate is unable to find a reason to condemn Jesus himself, he sends him to Herod for further examination, perhaps thinking that the Tetrarch of Galilee will have insight in a case involving a Galilean. Here's how this goes down. Herod was delighted at the opportunity to see Jesus because he had heard about him and been hoping for a long time to see him perform a miracle. He asked Jesus question after question, but Jesus refused to answer. Meanwhile, the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law stood there shouting their accusations. Then Herod and his soldiers began mocking and ridiculing Jesus. Finally, they put a royal robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. Luke 23, 8 through 11. Herod is seemingly thrilled to get on such a noteworthy decision. He's heard about Jesus and has been trying to get his eyes on him since he was born. And Herod wants a show. Just like in Jesus' temptations in the wilderness 3 years earlier, Herod wants Jesus to wow him, entertain him, and give him a show. Jesus has exactly nothing to give him. He will not entertain him. The power of Jesus' authority and kingship is shown in the scenes not through action, but through restraint. Jesus' silence is not weakness, it is meekness. And meekness means strength under control. And Jesus knows Herod is like many others who have eyes but cannot see, and ears but cannot hear. And that right there is the irony of Luke's writing, that while Jesus is standing right in front of Herod, he cannot see who he really is. He won't listen, so Jesus won't speak. Again, Jesus knows his identity. He has nothing to prove. Unlike me, Jesus doesn't live with this lingering insecurity that causes him to want to prove himself. So for Jesus, what looks like weakness is actually strength. What looks like being passive is actually authority. What looks like silence is actually truth being spoken in a different way. And this is where it comes back to us. I wonder how many of us are living like every moment, discussion, or controversy needs a response. Does every insult require a rebuttal? Does every misunderstanding really need to be corrected? Do I need to be right no matter what? In our flesh, we would answer these questions with a yes. But Jesus shows us another way. Jesus' way of living is so free and so secure in the Father that you don't have to prove anything. So remember what I said earlier, say it with me. With Jesus, I can live with nothing to lose, nothing to hide, and nothing to prove. Let's go back with Jesus to scene 4 when he has to face Pilate again. The choice, Barabbas or Jesus. Then Pilate called together the leading priests and the other religious leaders, along with the people, and he announced his verdict. You brought this man to me, accusing him of leading a revolt. I have examined him thoroughly on this point in your presence and found him innocent. Herod came to the same conclusion and sent him back to us. Nothing this man has done calls for the death penalty, so I will have him flogged and then will release him. Then a mighty roar rose from the crowd, and with one voice they shouted, kill him and release Barabbas to us. Barabbas was in prison for taking part in an insurrection in Jerusalem against the government and for murder. Pilate argued with them because he wanted to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, crucify him, crucify him. For the third time he demanded, why? What crimes has he committed? I have found no reason to sentence him to death. So I will have him flogged, and then I will release him. But the mob shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified. Their voices prevailed. So Pilate sentenced Jesus to die, as they demanded. Luke 23:13 through 24. So now Pilate brings everyone back together, the religious leaders, the crowd, and Jesus standing there right in the middle. And Pilate says 2 more times that he finds Jesus innocent. While Pilate is convinced Jesus is innocent, he is also aware that his job is to keep the city from an uproar that would get him replaced. Pilate follows what Mark describes as a Passover tradition of releasing a guilty criminal. To Pilate's amazement, the crowd chooses Barabbas. He was known to be a violent person, and everybody agreed that he was guilty, yet the crowd chose him. Luke says, their shouts prevailed. They chose Barabbas, the man of force, the man of control, the man of dominance, and they rejected Jesus. For the first of many times, Jesus will take the place of a sinner. In this moment, we see the grand choice on display that all of us must answer. Will we choose Jesus or Barabbas? Here's the reality of that choice. With Jesus in his way, I can live with nothing to lose, nothing to hide, and nothing to prove. With Barabbas in his way, I can live with fleeting human power, the illusion of control, and always trying to prove myself right. Why would any of us choose to stay in that internal and external turmoil on purpose? Jesus gives us a better way. Henry expresses our dilemma like this. The long, painful history of the church is the history of people ever and again tempted to choose power over love, control over the cross, being a leader over being led, those who resisted this temptation to the end and thereby give us hope, and they are the true saints. Caesar, Pilate, and the Sanhedrin must partner with a military power and Barabbas-type enforcers to preserve and enforce their will. Jesus partners with peasants, the poor, the uneducated, the weak, those with dirty feet and questionable pasts. When will we learn the reality of the choice we make? Can't you and I see all these 2,000 years later that Caesar is a salad dressing and Jesus is Lord? Do we really believe the truth of God spoken through Jesus for each of us? Your worth does not depend on winning every verdict. You can release the exhausting need to prove yourself. Dr. Dallas Willard was a brilliant academic philosopher and a long-tenured professor and dean at the University of South California. He won awards as a teacher and an author and was simply regarded as brilliant. But that's not all. In a rare combination of virtues, Dallas Willard was incredibly kind and wise. People seemed to be drawn to him as a person, not just a professor. His ambition in life was to follow Jesus in living a life of love. One time, a fellow professor was visiting Dr. Willard's classroom to watch him teach. Right before the class ended, a student raised his hand, at first to ask a question, but then a flat-out objection and rejection of what Willard had just taught. The foolish, confident student did not stop with a simple argument. The student stood and rudely insulted Dr. Willard's knowledge. His barrage of offensive words continued on for far too long. The visiting professor held his breath. He knew that at any moment, Dr. Dallas Willard, dean, author, and PhD, could absolutely verbally slay this college kid and put him back in his place. The silence hung in the air for what seemed like forever. After a few quiet seconds, Dr. Willard collected his notes, looked up at his students, and he said, "Well, this seems like a good place to leave the conversation today. I'll end class now and see you next week." The class shuffled quietly out of the door. At that moment, the visiting professor came rushing down to Dallas in front of the lecture hall. "Why in the world did you do that?" his fellow professor and friend asked him. "You know and I know that that student was completely wrong. And not only that, they were insulting to you. Why didn't you let him have it? Why didn't you at least correct the student, tell the truth, and put him in his place?" Dallas chuckled and took a deep breath, and then he replied quietly, saying, "Well, I was simply practicing the discipline of not having to have the last word." Dallas Willard. The band is going to start making their way back up here for our last song. I want us to spend some time with the Lord today, asking Him to help us tame our tongues. We cannot do it on our own, but He can, and as we saw today, He has. I try my best on a regular basis to practice not having to have the last word, and fail more often than I succeed. But what I will continue to do is to make an honest effort to be better at it each day. And I will continue to ask for the Lord's help. Let's stand and worship.